Literature has long history of traditional novel of espionage. Literature magnifies the myth of spycraft. Our guest had the specialty of both discipline. He belonged to the outstanding Central Intelligence Agency, and he is an author of a certain number of novels, notably a book entitled Canary Trap, whose resume is about a CIA officer with extensive experience in the US intelligence community who navigates the corrupt political landscape of El Salvador. But our guest, Abel, will resume its experience, but you have to understand the confidential aspects of his work, so we also will remain silent of his activity in CIA. Writing a book is a good alibi to speak about how things are going without being really exposed. But now, let's not waste another minute. Let's welcome Anthony Patton. Anthony Patton, hello.
Hello, I'm here.
Hello, thank you for being there today. First and foremost, I will announce the plan of your interview. We will talk about the plot of your astonishing novel. Then we will deal with the characters, and then we have the general question about this. So, first question: can you sum up your incredible experience and tell us about the plot of this novel?
Yeah, well, first of all, again, thank you very much for having me. I apologize to your listeners that I do not speak your beautiful native language, but we'll have to make do with English.
You've never been to France before?
I have been to France multiple times. Beautiful country. I never was able to learn French. I speak some other languages, but it's a beautiful country, and I love the people and hope to go back again soon.
Yeah, okay. Concerning your experience, without giving any details, any precise details, can you sum up your experience?
Sure. Yeah. In one form or another, I've worked in the U.S. intelligence community for over 30 years. I wore a uniform. I've been a civilian. I'm a former CIA officer, and so I've done quite a bit of assignments in various places around the world. It's been very interesting. I'm currently living in Florida, semi-retired. I still, I write and do some other contracting work, but it's.
What is your best souvenir of your period in army?
Well, I think just when I worked with some of the foreign governments, they would give me gifts, mementos, paintings type gifts that would help me my time. Yeah.
And
so go ahead. Yeah.
When did you realize that you have to write books? You have to.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I've actually been, I've been writing for an even longer period of time. I had a very dynamic English professor in college who inspired me to want to put pen to paper and start writing stories. So I've been writing for many years, and just over the time, I've learned to sort of discover my particular voice and way of expressing things. I've had fiction, nonfiction. Have even written a few screenplays.
So you've got also a good writing experience too.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm mostly I didn't go have any formal training like at a master's in writing course or anything like that. I would read a lot of books and look at styles that I like and maybe try to emulate them. But also,
is it more difficult to put writing a book or doing intelligence?
I have found that writing novels is probably the most challenging thing that I've done.
You can be a god. You can be.
Well, yeah, and there's a certain responsibility that goes with it because at a certain point, the characters kind of take on their own life, and you almost feel a certain responsibility to make sure that the story is told in the correct way.
So let's talk about Canary Trap. First of all,
Yeah.
before dealing with the plot, why did you choose the title Canary Trap?
Okay, so a canary trap is a technique within the world of counterintelligence, which is if you suspect that you might have a mole working within your organization, a canary trap is where you give different people unique but false information, and then you wait to see if it surfaces on the other end. So if you tell someone a fake piece of information, and then 2 days later that's in the news, then you have figured out that that person was somehow responsible. And so a canary trap is how you feed false people. And why this is important for the world of espionage is that when you're in the business of collecting intelligence, other intelligence services know this, and so they attempt to get within your collection networks to feed you false information. And so to me, that just seemed like a good way to address one of the biggest challenges of working with an intelligence is how do you know that the information that you're collecting is true, or an information operation to maybe manipulate you to do something. So you're always very cautious of that. And in the case of this book, I think, as you recall, there's a point where Thomas receives information about fake Chinese ballots being sent to manipulate the election, and it turns out that those ballots never existed. That was a canary trap to force them to try to break into the warehouse to look for them, and then they captured that on video.
So, Canary Trap, of it, we well understood of it why the title is so enigmatic, and now it's clear. Can you sum up the resume of Canary Trap? What is it talking about?
Sure. Okay, so the hero of the story, Thomas, he's a young man in the early stages of his career. And he spent some time overseas, and he was back in headquarters looking for the next assignment. And he meets a legendary character named Nicholas Lowe, who, by the way, is the hero of my first novel. And so I brought him back. And yes, and so that's where Nicholas comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Nicholas is an El Salvador expert. In fact, he served there. According in the world of fiction, of course, he served in El Salvador back in the 80s, so he has a lot of connections. And so Nicholas recognizes that Thomas is probably the right person to go there. And so what he finds in El Salvador is sort of a microcosm of what's happening in America, is that you have a political divide between like the far left and the far right. But by being in a small country like El Salvador, that contrast is magnified. And so in many ways, the story, like I said, is sort of a metaphor for what's happening in America right now. And when Thomas is thrown in the middle of it, he sees problems on both sides, and then he learns about the uprising of a new third-party character, Marco Simon, and it's about how Thomas takes steps to make sure that they just have free and fair elections. He doesn't want to pick the winner. He just wants to make sure that the country has a different option.
We won't deliver the end of the story, of course, but if you want to read it, it's better.
Yes.
But what I found very interesting was the astonishing political background set in El Salvador. How did you choose this location? Have you made some studies about this place, and how did you manage to draw a realistic background as such as in Canary Trap.
Yeah. Well, like I said, one of the other important characters of the book, Nicholas Lowe, he previously served there, and I wanted to bring him back. And part of the reason I selected El Salvador, and again, I don't want to give away the ending of the book, but El Salvador recently had some elections that in many ways is sort of similar or parallel to some of the issues that are raised in the book. And so obviously I didn't use, there's no true names, there's no real events, because I don't want to get into any particular, potential problems there. But yeah, so it was mostly the fact that I thought El Salvador served as a good crucible for this story to play out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, but because El Salvador has a history of espionage, covert operation, intelligence activities, which adds the elements of intrigue to the story. The presence of various political factions, I noted, government agency and clandestine operation creates in the book the sensation of tense and suspenseful atmosphere. Don't you find it?
Well, I mean, I certainly appreciate that. That suggests to me that I was successful in telling the story, because of course creating the conflict and the tension is a big part of that. Now, and the other part is I liked the idea, because a lot of books about espionage, they tend to bounce around in big cities like London and Paris and Tokyo, and they normally have they have assassins and a lot of explosions, and
the location is very special.
Yeah, and so I thought it would be very important or different to bring it into sort of a lesser known location with events that maybe aren't shaping the news on a daily basis for sure, but just so that people can see that even in a small country like this, that there's a lot happening.
Now let's talk about the characters in Canary Trap. First we can evoke the male character, and then the female character. I noted different characters there. I noted Thomas, Pablo, General Antonio Guevara, Marco Simon. There are many characters. How did you realize manage to draw the characters? So you take personally one character and then you make a list of his humor, or how do you decide that?
Yeah, so there's in the storytelling process, right? The first thing I'll try to do is sort of sketch out like a broad brush sort of story arc of what I would like to happen. And then the next step, it's almost like playing chess. You kind of have to figure out, well, what types of major events and major characters will I need in order for this story to play out? And so obviously if Thomas is going to arrive there, he's going to need some official points of contact. He's going to need to meet with some sources. And so it begins a little more abstract, where you try to think like, what does this story need in order to keep moving forward?
Yeah.
And then from there, you start building up the characters, right? You try to make sure that each one, comes to life and, in his or her own way, and somehow contributes to the story. So it's an organic process. And there were some characters at some point that were probably deleted because they weren't really adding to the story, or others had to be adjusted, what their primary motivation was to kind of keep advancing the story.
I got a question about Thomas' background. How did his past and his actual activity at CIA, as a CIA officer, influence his actions and decisions in navigating the political landscape in El Salvador, in Canary Trap? How does it make?
Yeah, and so Thomas, he's from what we call the Midwest. He's from Minnesota. He comes from a very, traditional, conservative culture, which, tends to, what we call, the American pie, apple pie, and the American flag, just sort of a traditional, patriotic country. And so he wasn't necessarily aware of maybe other political movements within his own country. And so I think when he arrived in El Salvador, he brought certain traditional American ideals with him. And when he saw the problems of corruption or whatnot, it really motivated him to, do what he can to try to stop really bad things from happening.
Yeah. Concerning Marco Siman, en fait, what role do key figures like Marco Siman or Pablo, for instance, en fait, play in assisting Thomas in uncovering corruption and exposing deceit in the story?
Sure. Well, and one of the things that I mentioned in the story is that, at least in the book, the office the CIA office was closed for many years. And so when a new person like Thomas arrives, one question a lot of people are going to ask is why? Why now? And so, Marco, I don't want to give away too much, but different characters are sort of plotting about how they want to get their desired outcome. And so when they meet Thomas for the first time, there's a big question of trust, right? Who can I trust? What does this person want? And so certainly, both Marco and Pablo probably would like to view Thomas as an ally, right? But who knows? So they kind of have to wait to see how events play out.
Back to Thomas, en fait, what motivates Thomas to confront corruption and manipulation in the story? How does the determination contribute to the narrative's development?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I said, Thomas grew up in an environment where he just he would take it for granted that, people in government and whatnot would do the right thing, would try to help their country and help their people. And I think once he got exposure to what's really happening behind the scenes, I think he really struggled with that. And, on both sides, like even people he thought should be his allies, he saw problems. And people who he thought should be his enemy, he saw that they had good ideas. And so he's sort of caught in between, where he's finally realizing that, the world's a lot more complex than he originally thought. And it bothered him. And so he just found an opportunity to help events play out in a way that he thought would be beneficial for everyone.
Ladies, en fait, also have a great role in the novel. I noticed two ladies, Beatrice, you're gonna tell us who she is, and Maria.
Maria,
yeah. Beatrice,
okay.
Beatrice, and Maria.
So Beatrice is oddly kind of his muse, right? He in college he met her. They actually had a relationship, you could say, and he was always intrigued by her because he loved her, passion and views about life, but at the same time he questioned her politically. And so during the story, their relationship grows, where I think they both realize that, part of their conflict is that they're both looking at the problem from different perspectives. And so Beatrice, I think, is sort of that, is kind of a love interest. It's a passion that keeps him going. I mean, part of his motivation for going to El Salvador is that's where she's working. right?
In what
And
ways does Thomas also now, and there, sorry, there's Maria. Maria is mentioned in the narrative of the FMLN leaders, opposed to Raoul.
yeah.
Is that correct?
So yeah. So we're talking about so her so she served back in the Civil War, and she also had a relationship with the FMLN commander, and there was this scandal, right? And
Yeah.
she was actually in love with Alejandro, and so again, I think she's similar in the sense that I think she genuinely wants what's best for the country, but she kind of played a secondary role, right? I mean, she didn't really have a position of authority or influence where she could really shape the events.
So thank you for those details. Now we are gonna talk about general question about the book in general. Will you accept the page turner badge? You are a page turner. Your story is good, and we, uh, we each time that we turn a page, we want to turn the next.
Well, I would say 100% yes, thank you. I mean that's I think what every writer wants, is to feel that they're creating this believable world.
I have read so many novels in espionage. I've read some book in the United States, such as Tom Clancy. Is that a reference for you or no?
Well, I mean, like you, I've read a lot of books on espionage. I find that a lot of them tend to be written in the third person. I have sort of a natural affinity for writing in the first person. I think it's a good way to really draw the reader in and to really get into the mind of the narrator and the hero. But there are pluses and minuses. I know a lot of people who just prefer third person. But I kind of go with what felt most natural for this story, and I just felt like telling the story through the eyes of Thomas was the best way to do it.
The skills of it you learned before are set in the heart of working or no?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The skills you learned
yes
during the past are sets of the art of working or writing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, certainly, having spent 30 years working in the business in various capacities, you tend to learn how things are actually done, but at the same time, books and movies tend to present things a little bit differently. I think audiences have a certain expectation. As you can imagine, in most movies, spy movies, there's a lot of things that happen that are either wrong or kind of silly, but it makes for good cinema, right?
Yeah.
And so I try to just sort of balance those two things to try to keep it somewhat as real as possible, but also keep it within audience expectations.
What do you think of corruption? Do you think of it's the worst criminal things of the world or not?
Well, no, I mean, I think I think part of Thomas's journey, and I certainly experienced this myself, probably like a lot of people, is that as we get older and wiser, we kind of realize that the world maybe didn't work exactly the way we thought it did. And so I mean, certainly corruption is nothing new. It happens everywhere and throughout time. I think it's just really a question of, what can we do to try to minimize it or control it or hold people accountable. But I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon.
Before the last words of it, it's a tradition in clandestine waves. I got one last question. I wouldn't want to be to be unpleasant, but I've got one question about the CIA. You have the right of it to remain silent. Do you know who killed Kennedy?
Um,
That's a real
I
question.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's very solid evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald fired a weapon. I think there's bigger questions, right? Like whether or not he was collaborating with other people and
Yeah.
uh, things like that, right? I mean, to me, those are the interesting details, Um,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your honesty.
yeah,
Thank you. So you've got the last words. You can say whatever you want to our auditors. You have the power.
okay. Well, once again, I mean, thank you so much. As just being a writer, it's so exciting and important just to know that people have read my book and like my book. I would just again say hello to everyone in France. I apologize for my English, but yeah, a very beautiful country, and I, look forward to going back there one day.
Yeah, thank you, en fait. So, Anthony, so I will conclude. Heir to a long line of spy novels, Canary Trap draws its strength from a thrilling spy story where false pretense marries the violence of the action. I really highly recommend the novel, with which I took so much pleasure. The setting of El Salvador serves as a backdrop for the intricate plots involving political intrigue, manipulation, and efforts to uncover the truth amidst a complex and challenging environment. It was nice. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Thank you, Anthony, for being there. And I hope that we will talk a little bit later on. Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon,
Thank
and
you.
thank you again.
Thank you.